The Aware Project's aim is to balance the public conversation about psychedelics, spread accurate information, and give a new face to psychedelia. We feel that this change will occur through connection and relationship, one individual at a time. We are calling on everyone whose lives have been improved through the mindful use of psychedelics to educate themselves and become ambassadors for the psychedelic experience. Show those around you that people who use psychedelics mindfully cross all social, racial, economic, and political boundaries.
All right, so we're going to have Marisa come up, and she's been one of our volunteers for a while now, and now she's coming up to share a little bit of her music. So I'm really excited. We'd like to kind of start off this space with just a little something, did all these announcements and everything, and just kind of drop into our bodies, drop into our hearts for a little bit, and just get into this collective space. So I really I'm so excited to hear her, and I hope you enjoy.
So my name is Marisa Reyes, and I'm just going to share some moon dance songs. Moon dance is a 4-night, 5-day ceremony that happens in Teotihuacan in Mexico. And this first song that I'm going to share is called Abuelito Fuego, and it's a way of honoring each of the elements. Abuelito Fuego, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Abuelito Fuego, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Madrecita tierra, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Madrecita tierra, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Padrecito viento, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Padrecito viento, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Madrecita agua, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Madrecita agua, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Oh, Meteo, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Oh, Meteo, las gracias te damos, las gracias te damos. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Por abrir el corazón a la sanación, abrirlo amor. Oh, Meteo, as we say. So Omateo is the god of the polarities, so bringing together the masculine and the feminine. So at any point throughout these songs, you feel like you want to be like, ow, arr, like whatever sounds you feel want to move out of you, I invite them. Oh, yes! So for this next song, actually, I just want to give a shout out to my moon dance madrina, Giselle Genesee. I learned these songs because I showed up to her full moon and new moon fire circles, and we would play this around the fire, honoring the moon. So this next song is a song for La Pipa Sagrada, the sacred pipe. Hay un corazón que nos guía y nos da toda su fuerza. corazón que nos guía y nos da toda su fuerza. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches esta pipa sagrada. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches mi corazón. Ayuda a los que tienen hambre, escucha la palabra buena. Ayuda a los que tienen hambre, escucha la palabra buena. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches esta pipa sagrada. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches mi corazón. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches esta pipa sagrada. Hoy te pido, gran espíritu, escuches mi corazón. Gracias. So for this last song, this is actually the first song I fell in love with at Giselle's Full Moon Fire Circle. And Giselle, can I have you come up and sing this one with me? I have a rattle for you. So this is my moon dance rattle. This is what I danced with for 4 nights, and it was 4 nights of just dancing our asses off and praying even harder. It was crazy. So the colibri is hummingbird. So hummingbird medicine is about tapping into that joyful spirit space and bringing in that warrior energy. So. En el centro de este fuego brilla un colibrí. En el centro de este fuego brilla un colibrí. Bri, 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 brilla un colibrí. Bri, 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 brilla un colibrí. Un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará. En el centro de este fuego brilla un colibrí. En el centro de este fuego brilla un colibrí. Bri, 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 brilla un colibrí. Bri, 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 brilla un colibrí. Un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará, un ave me llevará. ¡Colibrí! So just to end, these are songs that we share in our ceremonies, and this is something that this has been my way of praying is through these songs. So if anyone has any questions about, more about the moon dance, I am always happy to share afterwards. So thank you. And thank you. It's been such an honor to work with you, Ashley. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. Thank you.
All right, so Preston is going to set up his laptop. Yay, okay. So now without any further ado, Preston.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. Oh, I'm kind of loud there. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. I drove from San Francisco today, and seeing all of your faces here makes it totally worth it. So thank you. And also thank you to Marisa for inviting me to give another talk here in LA. It's really great to see how interested and engaged everyone is in this community and how interested people are in this work. I find it to be the most interesting thing I've done or been involved with so far. So thanks for coming along on this journey with me. So I'm basically here to talk about what I believe is the future of psychedelic drug development. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the past. So the past of psychedelic plant medicine, or psychedelic medicine, was with plants. Stuff like Amanita muscaria, marijuana, psilocybin, psilocybe cubensis, iboga, etc. These are the OG psychedelics, so to speak. Somewhere along the line, people came up with the idea to combine them. And unfortunately, most of these recipes did not survive. Many of us have heard of the famed Soma and some of these other drug cocktails, these plant medicine cocktails. The most popular one these days is definitely ayahuasca, I would say. That eventually gave way to simple plant extracts. You do a simple acid-base extraction, you get your DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, ibogaine, cathinones, etc. So that's all pretty simple so far. And then at some point we get a little better at chemistry. We figure out how to make LSD from ergot, which was a wonderful accident. We figured out how to make MDMA. MDMA was actually first made, I think, in like the early 1907 or something like that, and was then popularized by Alexander Shulgin, who figured out a very efficient and effective way to extract it from saffron. Speaking of Shulgin, he is also the man responsible for popularizing designer drugs like 2CB and a slew of others. This is what really got my attention, was designer drugs. I grew up doing a lot of drugs. I started very young, at the tender age of 3. I was diagnosed with ADD at the age of 18 months old, and my parents very kindly waited until I was 3 to put me on Ritalin. So growing up, this gave me a fascination with medicine and medication. I grew up being medicated. Medication is something that you take every day in order to cope with some kind of illness, some disease, something. And this gave me a fascination with medicines, things that can actually help you heal and move past a wound rather than just coping, just trying to, get through the days. So I became very interested in the numerous different designer drugs available, research chemicals. And I began just keeping a list of everything I tried, taking notes. And at some point, it occurred to me that these could be combined in very interesting ways, some of these drugs. So this brings me to the final phase thus far, and that is polydrugs. So you could say that polydrugs, which would be like a combination of drugs, that started really with ecstasy back in the day. Ecstasy was, originally it was MDMA, but then at some point people said, well, you could take MDA and combine it with an amphetamine, and then you have something that's in some cases better than MDMA itself. So that's what people started doing. Somewhere along the line, ecstasy began to mean not MDMA, or it began to mean like some random cocktail of drugs that was whatever the chemist or the drug dealer could source. So it began to be more of a compromise. So nowadays, when you think of, there's MDMA and then there's ecstasy. But in the beginning, it wasn't really like that. And now I'd like to talk about two polydrugs, which are not compromises. They are intended to just be improvements. So those two drugs are Poly and Wali. So Poly is designed as an upgrade to Molly, and it is a blend of 3 drugs designed to have synergistic effects. So you end up with a cleaner, clearer, smoother, deeper experience with much fewer side effects, little to no come down, no hangover. Most people feel really pleasant in the days following, and there's not much physical side effects at all, really. I think about 1,300 to 1,400 people have tried it thus far in the past 5 years. Then we come to Wali. Wali was designed as a discovered as a deep shamanic medicine. It's a blend of 5 drugs featuring 2 dissociatives. It lasts 8 to 12 hours, and it's experientially comparable to a cross between ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT, and MDMA. I don't know why that's funny, but there's been about 150 or so trials in the last 2 years, and it requires quite a bit more supervision than Poly. So it's a little more difficult to test, so to speak. So let's start with Poly. What's in it? First of all, there's 3 things, alphabet number soup. 5-MAP-B, 5-MAPB. This was developed by Dave Nichols as kind of a less toxic alternative to MDMA. And a lot of this toxicity, the talk about MDMA toxicity, I would say it's still mostly speculative, and I would say that it largely only applies to very heavy users and not really the kind of people that would be taking it in a therapeutic sense. So when I mention MDMA toxicity, I'm really speaking about the people who overdo it, or the people who are chronic users. So like chronic use can induce toxicity, or very heavy, like weekend of use can also induce some toxicity. So keep that in mind. Don't be scared. So 5-MAP-B is mostly a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, but it also acts in the serotonin transporter, which means it boosts all serotonin activity across the board. This is combined with a very low dose of a tryptamine, which at this point I'm using 4-ACO malt. It's a mild analog of psilocin, and the idea is this tryptamine releases a low dose, a little bit of serotonin, which then the 5-MAP-B cross-potentiates, and it makes more use of it, the reuptake inhibition. So the idea is you take a little bit of effect from this and you magnify that effect with that. If you took, so the way they're dosed in Poly, if you were to take just the tryptamine, you wouldn't feel much. If you were to take just the 5-MAP-B, you wouldn't feel that much. But together, they have a really nice synergy. And this is where research chemicals are very interesting to me, because you can take 2 things that are not that interesting on their own and combine them with very interesting results. The third is 4-fluoromethylphenidate. It's a fluorinated Ritalin analog. Mostly it's a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. It basically prevents couch lock and makes the experience more engaging and more interested. So you can have good conversations, you can be really engaged and coherent with what's going on in your head and around you. So I mentioned toxicity briefly in the last slide. So the idea behind Poly is to make something that's not only is to make something that you never feel worse than you did before you took it. And also to have something that's not toxic and that can provide you with the depth of the experience, all the depth of MDMA without any downside. So there's 1 to 3 ways in which MDMA may be neurotoxic. Neurotoxicity may recur as a result of oxidation and cell death when dopamine uptake occurs at serotonin receptor sites after the brain is depleted from serotonin. So this is a theory from Dave Nichols, and it's widely accepted, but I wouldn't say it's exactly been proven. The idea is once the brain is depleted of serotonin and there's dopamine around, then the serotonin receptors begin uptaking dopamine, and this causes cell death and can cause neurotoxicity. The second cause is cardiotoxicity, which can occur due to MDMA's action at the calcium channel. There's drugs you can take to block this effect, but in the case of 5-MAP-B, this action is not present, so it's not a factor. This cardiotoxicity can be a result of ventricular dysfunction and ventricular failure. This was proven in rats and has not been proven in mice yet. Saying that. It has been proven in rats, not yet been proven in humans. The third is neurotoxicity and or serotonin depletion may occur just because MDMA is a very potent drug and you might deplete your brain of serotonin. By contrast, poly hopes to be much less toxic partially because there is a dopamine reuptake inhibition effect rather than the dopamine agonism that comes with MDMA. Second, as I mentioned, 5-MAP-B is very, very, very likely has no action on the calcium channel. And 3, poly is mostly a serotonin reuptake inhibitor and uses relatively little serotonin agonism compared to MDMA. So this is that. Now for some experience reports. So this is a basic run-of-the-mill good experience, and some of the qualifications for a good experience, as many of you know, are set and setting. So the set and setting for this experience was ideal, and within that container he had this is about what you would expect with a good container and a good group of people. I was able to experience the profound healing qualities of poly as I took it in a small group setting this past week. Once ingested, its effects was smooth and regular. I was able to move past certain blocks and see patterns rather easily. I was at ease in my body, dancing and finding my own rhythm, while also able to connect beautifully with others. There was an expansion beyond my personal self, and it just felt like more of my loving, true nature was able to be expressed. A deep, deep gratitude for my life, what I'm involved in, and all of life. Beautiful dancing with the universe, and while I also felt some pain of deep hurts, these were expressed and felt released with the support of others. It is aptly named, I think. It did indeed make me want to connect with others deeply and with an open heart. So that's a good report, and this is about average for a good container. And then kind of the more outlying reports would be, it is the single greatest substance I've ever put in my body, or it was the most connected I've ever felt to another human being. It unlocked my powers as a healer. Suddenly I'm able to do really powerful energy work with my hands, and I can do it without the medicine. In the context of someone who had been able to come out of the closet, it allowed them to finally drop their sexual shame, come out as who they were, and open their heart to receive the love that was waiting for them. One of my favorites is, we're here at Burning Man and all anyone is talking about at our camp is poly. Poly this, poly that. Have you tried poly? I'm sick of hearing about it. We're at the burn. It's about the burn. It's not about the drugs. Which I agree with, and it's also very flattering, very good report. Lastly, we've been finding that the influence of poly in our lives has been bringing so much to the surface. Our relationship has been changing and evolving in ways we would have never expected. So, yeah, really good reports overall. I've been happy with it. And with that, I'm gonna, before I switch to Wally, if anyone has any questions, particularly about poly.
Seeing that it got taken it. Burning Man tells me that there's an underground market for it. Has there been any kind of influences into, or has it been like end up getting cut, or is it able to be like relatively pure within the market?
It's able to be pure. The availability of it now is pretty abysmal, just due to sourcing of these ingredients. But it's always been pure. Yeah, I mean, it's as pure as its constituents. Yeah. Any other questions for?
I remember going back to the previous slide, you said that you could replace, I forgot, something with 4-ACO-MET. Couldn't you also replace, for example, the MAPB with 6-APB, or the 4-FMPH with like just another research chemical stimulant of its kind to replicate the effect that you want?
Really good question. So the 6 series is a bit more stimulating. The 6 series of the benzofurans. So 6-MAPB, 6-APB, 6-APDB, they're all considerably more stimulating. This extra stimulation is, I don't really want that. I want the stimulation to come from a stimulant of my choosing. That way I have precise control over exactly how stimulating and in what way it will be stimulating. So for me, the choice of the 5-MAPB is because it is, as far as I know, in the benzofuran series, it's the in the benzofuran series, it's the most, it has the most serotonin reuptake inhibition. And so what I'm going for is that effect, the reuptake inhibition. So the only other potential candidate would be 5-MAPDI, which is basically, it's like made a brief appearance for like a few months, and it's been gone ever since. So MDA is not really legal. It could work, but part of the beauty of poly is that nothing is scheduled in it, which made it a lot easier to talk about, at least.
Could you, you led right into my question beautifully. In terms of the Analog Act, I only know a little bit about that, and many people may not know about that. Do you think you could share a little bit about that and how that relates to the research chemicals?
Yeah, so the Analog Act, for those of you that don't know, it's basically any drug that is similar enough, only like a couple of steps away from a scheduled substance, is considered an analog, and you can be charged, you can be persecuted for it, but a lot of it comes down to the intent. So you can buy like large volumes of any of these drugs as long as they're quote unquote not for human consumption. So it's definitely a gray area, and part of the reason why I feel comfortable talking about this now is because the supply is there's just none out there. So yeah, this is it's nice to be able to present this body of research without the kind of worrying about being outed, so to speak. But yeah, that makes it a tricky gray area. In some cases, like this one, the Ritalin analog, any analog of a Schedule 3 substance is not even really on that radar. It's only the analogs of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So yeah.
So with Polly and with Wally, you're talking about it like these are cocktails that are out there that exist. But I'm curious, is this your recipe? Is this a recipe in a group that you're in, or who created it?
So,
how did it get created?
Good question. So the original recipe for Polly came from a Reddit post from this user named Borax, and people called it the Borax formula, and it wasn't terribly popular. It's not the best name, but he he was onto something though. He had 5-MAP-B, he had a tryptamine, and he had a stimulant. It was a really basic recipe. But upon researching 5-MAP-B, I discovered it's a reuptake inhibitor and it's activating the tryptamine. And I began playing with the recipe, and I made a couple of substitutions. I tweaked the ratios. That became poly, and that's my baby. Although you could say I adopted it or derived it from this recipe. Wally is all my creation, and that's thus far I've not been working with another group. Mm-hmm. Okay, so with that, I think it might be time to head over to Wally World. So Wally is really, really interesting experience. And as for what's in it, there's 5 main ingredients. The first is decichloroketamine. This is another thing that you just can't find anymore, especially as of this year. There was a ban in China, unfortunately. And it's on September 5th, and it's no longer being produced, except maybe in Europe, but that might be a rumor. So decichloroketamine is ketamine without the chlorine on the. This is wrong. It's ketamine without the chlorine on the benzene ring. It's much more potent, much longer lasting, and much more psychedelic. Probably my favorite single molecule, to be honest. It has a way of allowing you to drop your stories and drop your narratives and be able to step into greater rapport with your higher self and with your soul, while uncovering like subconscious programs and processes that have been running below your awareness. It just allows them to come to the surface and be seen. And yeah, it's a really powerful medicine. So that's kind of the backbone of Wally. That's everything else is just meant to support and enhance that experience. The second one is 2-oxo-PCE. This is meant to just kind of bolster that dissociative experience. It's a bit longer lasting than decichloroketamine. And it's also quite a bit colder. Not that interesting by itself for me. The third is another benzofuran analog. I use either 5-APDB or 5-APB, not 5-MAPB, because I kind of want, because I'm not really going for a serotonergic experience here so much, so I don't have to worry about blowing out the serotonin receptors. Then finally 2-CB-Fly. It's a long-lasting dihydrobenzofuran analog of 2-CB. And mostly this just adds a little sparkles and a little bit of visuals so people know that they have taken a drug, that they're having experience. It sounds weird, but when you're dissociated, sometimes it's easy to kind of forget and just be like, wait, what happened? Am I just going to be like this forever? What's going on? So having a little bit of visuals kind of gives people kind of a reference point for reality. And a reference point that they'll be back. So finally, a very low dose of the fluorinated Ritalin analog for FMPH. So these all combine to create the experience. Now, what's it like? Well, the greatest report I think I've had from this, and this person may or may not be in the room right now. They said, I finally feel like me. After so many years on this planet, I finally feel like I belong in this life and in this skin. I finally get it. I'm finally able to love myself for the first time. You have no idea what it's been like. And 9 months later, totally stable change. He had been on antidepressants for 10 years prior to that, and just kind of thought that was going to be his life. Like I'll just be on antidepressants for the rest of my life, and I'll just make that work. But no, it's been a stable change. He was able to get off with the help of a tremendously skilled facilitator that was crucial to the experience. So yeah, this was this was, I think, the best report I've had. That night last April was the most important night in my life. I've remained transformed. Other great reports would say it was like 10 hours of pure enlightenment. It feels like an ascended state. It's better than Toad, says the Toad shaman. It's a peak psychedelic experience, says the 100+ trip ayahuascaran. The pinnacle of psychedelic experiences brought me out of what felt like a hopeless depression in only the first few hours, then gave me one of the most profoundly deep healing experiences of my life 6 to 7 hours in. That was me. I've experienced 3 births so far. My birth, the birth of my child, and this. My favorite story about this, and I can't name names, but there was a guy that I'm friends with who had a small circle between himself and two other gentlemen, and one of his friends was just being really annoying. Was like bothering people up in their space, trying to talk to them, being very intellectual. People are trying to drop in there, have their own little experiences, and he's kind of popping their bubbles. So finally, they get annoyed with him, and they tell him, just go write down. Just go here's a pen. Go write down your thoughts. Just leave us alone for a little while. So he did that. He wrote down his thoughts, and he came up with these like 5 or 6 pages of like kind of like a manifesto. So he'd written a book before, so it's not. Anyway, over the next like year and a half, he developed these 5 pages into a 400-page book, and it became the bestseller on Amazon for at least 22 weeks, maybe 25 weeks. Like #1 bestseller in all of Amazon for like 25 weeks. So that was my favorite story, I think. And it's not always good. That's kind of the problem with Wali. There's this factor of the dissociative. So based on people's genetic makeup, they break down dissociatives either slower or faster than other people. This is particularly a problem in about 5% of the population. And for those people, the dissociative lasts for anywhere from a few hours longer to a few days longer. And I think something about how that drug gets broken down may get broken down into toxic metabolites. If they're missing some of the enzymes crucial to break down the whole drug, then they just break down parts of the drug, and what they're left with is something that may or may not be a little more toxic or a little more potent than what they started with. So for these people, it really, really, really sucks, and it's been challenging to say the least. This is why Wali, although it's incredible experiences, requires a lot of supervision, and I'm working on coming up with an antidote to people that have really difficult experiences. At this point, it's probably going to look like either just taking the raw enzyme, which my guess is it's the CYP2B6 enzyme, or taking an inducer for that enzyme to allow it to do its work. But yeah, basically, I don't want you to think that it's all a bed of like weird trippy roses. It's there's some difficulties with that one. Okay, so. With that all being said, are there any questions about Wali? Right there.
Would a person have a clue which side of that fence they would fall on a Wali based on how fast or slow they break down ketamine?
Yeah, so ketamine would be a good example. Cough syrup is probably the best example. Ketamine is surprisingly easy to break down. Even for people that have this issue, although I've heard of a case. I met a man who was high on ketamine for 2 months after a single dose, and not like he felt it for 2, but like he was high, like can't go to work, can't do anything but stuff that's fun on ketamine. That was it. So he partied a lot. He became a great dancer. But yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. There really needs to be more research into that with the prevalence of ketamine clinics coming up.
That's right along the line of my question. Is there a name for that? What you're talking about, that 5%? Is there a body of research we can look into? Can you expand on how we look into that scientifically?
I wish. It's very speculative at this point. I'm working on assembling people who have had these difficult experiences on ketamine or other dissociatives, or people who just have really long experiences on them, and getting their 23andMe done, and then seeing what the correlation is, what their enzymes look like. And my hope is that it's a simple enough problem to assess and figure out, so I can develop a good test for it, and also have a good simple antidote for it.
Do we see that across other psychedelics too? This is the first time I've ever heard of doing something that's
So the question is, does this appear with other psychedelics, or this is the first time she's heard of something so specific? And so this gets into drug metabolism. My understanding is that the prevalence of the enzymes in our liver that break down drugs is proportionate to the presence of those drugs in our environment. So in the case of some of the more common cytochrome proteins, which would be CYP2D6, CYP3AF, 3YF, I believe. These break down drugs that we have been taking for centuries, arguably millennia. So a lot of the more serotonergic psychedelics, pretty easy to break down. We have no shortage of them. But some of these drugs, like dissociatives, the enzyme that breaks down dissociatives only accounts for about 3% of the total amount of. So there's about 12 or 14 enzymes that are responsible for breaking down the majority of all drugs that we take, and the enzyme that breaks down dissociatives only makes up for 3% of the total population of those enzymes in a normal person's liver. So if you're even just a little bit abnormal, you don't have much room to play with that 3%. So if you're completely missing it, missing that enzyme, it wouldn't be that crazy. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, I had a whole slide on. I had slides on this, but I took it out, because I wasn't sure what the interest in drug metabolism would be. But yeah, lesson learned. Any more questions before? Yeah.
What's your background, academically or garage-wise?
Oh man, I get so nervous when people ask this question. I don't really know what to say, except I grew up with a fascination with medicine, and a very curious, explorative nature. So yeah, I really have no background other than my interests and my enthusiasm and my I guess. I don't know, it's kind of weird what I do. I don't know what anyone else is doing precisely this. It's a weird space to have found myself in. Yeah. There's a couple more.
When you said Wally goes really bad, when it goes bad, what specifically does that mean? Is it psychological? Is it physical? What's the danger factor of that?
It's physiological. It could be a lot of muscle tension. It could be a lot of just discomfort. It could be a lot of not necessarily purging, just being sick. Purging on Wally is normal, but being really, really sick for hours is not normal or desirable. It could show up as body aches, headaches, insomnia, just a weird feeling of dissociation and highness that persists in a really uncomfortable way. so there's so the idea of Wally is that there's the dissociative component, which is desichlorketamine, but then there's the entourage is mostly serotonergic. The entourage is designed to, or the other ingredients are designed to open the heart and create a loving container for that dissociation to occur. So when that loving container expires and you're still dissociated, it gets really weird, and people are not usually not terribly happy about it. At best, they can come up with a silver lining, but it's very, very gray clouds for them.
What are your thoughts on the antibiotic properties of DCK? Have you seen any issues with that, or are there potential like gastrointestinal or antibiotic resistance issues? I mean, I guess if you're using it very sporadically or occasionally, perhaps not, but do you have any insight on that?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. I have a friend who had kind of a problem with DCK as far as like chronic use. And he didn't look so great. Honestly, outside of that, I don't know. The antibiotic effect is pretty, or the antimicrobial effect is pretty. It's measurable, but in the sporadic doses, I don't know what the effect would be as far as like nuking the microbiome. I do know that I have a friend that overdid it and did not look good. That's all I got. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's been a while now since he's done it, but I guess for a couple of months. I mean, he was on it actively during that time. Yeah, so be careful.
So I noticed for more conventional drugs that people have more experiences with, LSD, MDMA per se, there's a whole body of language that we use to describe our experiences. Is it difficult experimenting with all of these sort of novel drugs that don't have a wide, let's say, basis of users or people have tried them, to even describe verbally what people experience while taking them?
Only with dissociatives. Dissociation is the only thing really that if you've just never had it, if you've never had that experience, it's really hard to describe. With LSD, it's kind of the same thing until you've been in that state, until you've had Toad or 5-MeO-DMT. There's just no way really to describe it. But the dissociation is really the only thing that I have trouble conveying to people prior. So that's why typically I recommend someone do a dissociative before you try Wally. It's because of that reason. All right, I think I have time for one more, then I gotta move on to the second part of the talk.
Really quick one. How did you come up with a name?
Wally?
Yeah.
It just came to me. Just the night I first tried it, I was with some friends, and I was like, I think this one's called Wally. What is next? If a random renegade psychedelic scientist can come up with those things, then there's pretty exciting stuff on the horizon. So Sasha Shulgin said that I'm looking for tools that can be used for studying the mind, and other people then will use the tools in finding out the aspects of the mental process and how it ties to the brain. So Sasha said this in '96, and I think he may have been speaking about his friend, Dr. Thomas Ray. Thomas Ray is a mentor to me, and he is, I feel, he could very well be the most important psychedelic scientist alive today. And I think that's based on the work I'm about to explain to you. He challenged the most predominant paradigm of psychedelic science, which is the misconception around serotonin 2, For many, 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 many years, we've kind of accepted it at face value that serotonin 2 is basically all that's going on that's important in psychedelic drugs. And in mice, we test for this for a head twitch. If we see their head twitching, we're like, oh, it's got the serotonin 2A action. It's a psychedelic. It's active. And that's as far as a lot of people look into it. But Thomas Ray was like, there's something else going on here. I mean, if you think about the incredible variance of psychedelics and the incredible variance of experience, it's got to be more than just this one receptor. So he worked with Shulgin and Nichols to have 25 drugs bioassayed for their affinity at a broad range of receptors. This wasn't always available. These broad panels were not always available, which is why we were misinformed in the past. We were not able to look for action at alpha and beta and sigma. We didn't even know about serotonin 7 until like the mid-90s. There's all of these drugs that we've just never been thinking to look for, to consider. And he characterized the effects of about 10 of them, and a little more than that. So let's go over that. These are 25 of the, and then some. These are 25 of the drugs that were selected by Thomas, Shulgin, and Nichols to be analyzed. And what he found was that this is a very abbreviated list, but these are done in order of their presence in the molecule, or how dominant the particular receptor is for a particular drug. So this is a much more interesting and nuanced picture. These D's, these are dopamine, the A's is alpha, the I is for imidazoline. Here we have serotonin 7, serotonin 1, serotonin 2, and then in ibogaine we have this whole soup here. It starts with sigma 2, dopamine, NMDA, kappa, mu. So it paints a very interesting picture of what's going on with psychedelics. That gives us the incredible range of experience. So let's start with serotonin 1. Serotonin 1 is pretty kind of boring one, really, but it's quite necessary to our human experience and our capability for logic and reason and rationality. And it's also why microdosing is a thing. If I go back just one slide, you can see LSD. So LSD is the strongest hit for serotonin 1. And when you take it at a low dose, that's basically all you get. If you take like 10 mics or less, all you're getting really is the serotonin 1. And then once you knock it up a notch, who's ever over microed themselves? Has anyone else ever over? Yeah, we call that a mini. That's, you minied yourself, and that's what happens when the serotonin 7 comes into play and things get a little trippy and weird. Suddenly you're very colorful in the conference room and very, very contemplative with your coworkers. So that's what happens. But if you keep the dose nice and low, then you're only getting serotonin 1, and this is the effect. A good example of this is a drug, DOT. I worked on some problems in my software. A certain problem had been plaguing me for the last 2 days. I had been putting in patches all over the place to fix the problem. Now I stumbled onto an elegant solution which made the problem evaporate. I replaced 2 pages of code with 5 elegant lines, and I was able to go back and pull out all the patches. So yeah, that's serotonin 1. Then we come to imidazoline. Imidazoline is the main ingredient in MDMA. It's the strongest hit for that, above serotonin 2, even. And it's responsible for feeling of ecstasy, empathy, oneness, compassion, openness, acceptance, healing, caring, forgiveness. It's a really beautiful one that I'm sure a few of you are familiar with. Yeah, but there's this conception that it's serotonin as far as MDMA is concerned, and it's not. It's imidazoline. imidazoline with the serotonin. So then we come to beta 2. Beta 2 is an experience of exuberance, a joy of living, a love of life, a sense of home, family, community, society, and humanity. It has a sense of happiness, joy, elegance, luxury. And it's identified most strongly in DOM, DOI, and Aleph 2. Yeah.
When you're talking about these different, the receptor sites or the actual, the neurotransmitters themselves? Because, I mean, there's only one serotonin, but are these do you understand my question?
So these are the neurotransmitters themselves. These are the neurotransmitters themselves. So the drug has an affinity for. So DOM has an affinity for the beta 2 receptor, and it interacts with those receptor sites. So that's what I'm speaking of. Does that make sense? Right. There's about 14 serotonins, and there's serotonin 5-HT2A. So you have serotonin 2, and then you have 2A. You have like the subtypes of the subtypes in many cases, and we go up to serotonin 7 at this point. We don't really understand much about. We don't understand that much about 3 to 6, or at least I don't understand that much about 3 to 6. Please do some research. Let me know if you find anything interesting. But as far as characterizing them in interesting ways, we don't know much about them. So yeah, this is beta 2. Some of these I'll have experience reports, some of them I do not. So alpha 2 is the essence of the world around us. It's the wetness and fluidity of water, the hardness and durability of rock, the beauty and allure of a rose. Thomas Ray likes to refer to it as kind of rasa, like the essence of something. It's identified in MDMA and mescaline most strongly. I've experienced this with mescaline, just enjoying the taste of food, just feeling like it was just so delicious, like the fruit was just so delicious and juicy in my mouth. I could really connect with it and feel its essence in a really deep and powerful way. So this is alpha 2. Then we come to alpha 1. And this is a tricky one because we haven't been able to find so DMT and DPT are kind of like a soup of different neurotransmitters. So it's difficult to isolate this one, and yet we have. It produces a sense of flow of events from the past through the present and into the future, kind of like a timeline. A sense of unfolding coherence, continuity, liveliness, and vitality of a scene. The sense that the scene and the entities that populate it extend into space and time. And this is what I mean by the timeline. It kind of gives you like a sense of like the future and the past, and that all is contained within that moment. Everything that ever happened, everything that will happen is kind of present in that moment. And the way that we've isolated this is or the way that Thomas has isolated this is through clonidine. So this is a peek at something we'll discuss in just a little bit. Clonidine is a pharmaceutical that releases alpha 1. And when you combine it with a serotonin 2 drug, you get a psychedelic experience. So even though there's no way for us to cleanly isolate alpha 1 in any classic psychedelic, we were able to do it by combining clonidine with 2-CB-Fly, which is mostly a serotonin 2 agonist. So this brings me to histamine 1. This is an interesting one. It gives you a sense of an other, like a friend, a parent, a spirit, an entity, or a being of some kind. This is the way that you feel like you can finish someone's sentences, or you know what they're going to say before they say it, because you have a conceptualization of them in your head. And this is kind of the mental organ that allows you to do that, to perceive others in that way. Finally, we come to dopamine. Now, this is a really interesting one. Dopamine is present in psilocin, LSD, and 5-MeO-DMT. These are 3 drugs that people tend to get a little bit fanatical about, and a lot of that can be due to the meaning and profundity of those experiences. It makes people passionate about them, not just about their ideas, but about the actual experiences themselves. And this is why what Ashley was talking about earlier about I'm not sure it was Ashley or Marisa, but talking about how like we can get a little carried away with ourselves and get really kind of fanatical about the experiences that we have, wanting just everyone to experience it. And that's perfectly natural given the profundity and depth of those experiences. But it's also important to realize that this is, of course, your brain is going to think that because you just had one of the most profound experiences of your life. So to keep that in mind as you go into these spaces and to realize that it is not for everyone. It is not for everyone. But if it's for you and it finds its way to you, then have at it, my friend. Yeah, so this brings me, so I'm going to skip, I don't have that much time left, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So this is the most interesting one to me. Sigma is the core of our being, the plant intelligence. It rules our primary emotions like anger, rage, fear, happiness, sadness, surprise, disgust. I believe it's the link to somatic memory. It's present in ibogaine, ketamine, decychloroketamine, DMT, and some others, mostly dissociatives and some tryptamines. Why this is really interesting to me is the sigma receptors effectively define and modulate the limbic system. The limbic system modulates emotion, behavior, instincts, motivation, learning, long-term or somatic memory. Thomas Ray has a theory that it may be the source of psychosomatic pain. And this is really fascinating to me. I have a friend who has Lyme's disease and who has sat with iboga, and it is the only thing that will relieve him of his Lyme's disease. And I've heard this multiple times, people having autoimmune relief from iboga. What's really interesting is that people don't, someone can have an addiction to opiates and can get clean using iboga without suffering withdrawal symptoms. That's really amazing, because think about it. What is causing the withdrawal symptoms in the first place? Like, what is causing you pain? Is it not doing the drug? Well, how does that work? What is causing that to happen? There's got to be some function or some faculty of the human body that allows it to inflict pain on itself to try to get it to take more opiates. And we believe that it's sigma. So by activating sigma, by bringing it to consciousness, somehow the body is able to see what it's doing it to itself and kind of release its grip. So if this were true, then it would also be the cause of the placebo and the nocebo effect. And there's some way in which that works too. There's some mechanism by which the placebo and the nocebo work. And it could very well be through sigma. So our hope is to do more research into this and also isolate sigma 1 and sigma 2 and understand their specific roles. It's a very, very interesting one to me. So then, getting close on time here. Okay. So serotonin 7, we mentioned this earlier. It alters anything that enters consciousness. Anything that's held into consciousness becomes rendered at a higher resolution. It just turns everything up to 11, basically. You can see it's present in DMT, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT, and it just adds an incredible layer of depth and richness to the experience. Like in the case of DMT, you end up in a whole other world. You talk to other entities. You have a completely out of this world experience, but it's all happening in your brain, and serotonin 7 is part of what allows that to happen and allows that richness of experience. Finally, here's serotonin 2. Serotonin 2 is the gatekeeper of consciousness. It allows other receptors to come into consciousness and be fully felt and experienced. It is a necessary component of any psychedelic, unless that psychedelic has serotonin 7 in it, and then it stands freely by itself. But yeah, serotonin 2 has no flavor of its own. Its only purpose is to allow other flavors to come through and other experiences to be felt. It was misunderstood as a paradigmatic psychedelic receptor for the last 30 years, but that was before reliable affinity screening at a broad panel of receptors was possible. Now that we have a bigger picture of what's going on, it's good to be busting this paradigm. So, putting it all in perspective, there's a poster, or there was a poster over there. I think there's still a few left. And yeah, this was my kind of attempt to put it all into one frame together. This is interesting stuff. We don't really have time to talk about this right now, but if you want to ask me about it later, I'd love to answer questions. So this slide kind of explains itself a bit, but the idea is that maybe these gurus, these prophets, these teachers had something going on in their brains that was a little bit unique and allowed them to access these states and speak from these higher states as though they were kind of on psychedelics, but just in their natural waking life through meditation. Perhaps they had a propensity towards a greater amount of one of these receptors, and through meditation and through cultivating that, they were able to be great leaders and great teachers, and that could be what happened. I'm not saying it is, but it's a very interesting theory that Thomas shared with me. So, this is what we've come up with. This is the Polydrug Starter Toolkit. So what we have here are serotonin 2 agonists, and then we have pharmaceuticals. In this case, this is a research chemical, but pharmaceuticals that, when combined, you have psychedelic states. So yeah, this is kind of what's just barely coming into existence. The idea is that you can have very targeted, specific psychedelic experiences. And again, I like to talk about this. We can discuss that later if y'all would like. So yeah, the goal of this is to have designer states, is to have like the example I like to give is if you want to go back in time and forgive your mother for something, then, and who doesn't want to do that, then you could activate the receptor that gives you the experience of the timeline. And you could add in the receptor that gives you the experience of the other, having like histamine. So you have a vivid experience of your mother back in time, and then you add in the receptor that activates forgiveness and love and empathy, and it's possible. You could have that experience. I'm not saying that you will, but I'm saying that you have a much better chance than classic psychedelics are more like a shotgun, and this is more like, could be more like a laser, basically. That's my hope. And Before I close, I just want to say something I've learned from Thomas and from my work with this is that the drug is not the teacher. We have a way, I think, of giving our power away to the drug and saying, oh, the medicine really, really helped me. And it just helped me see myself. And that's, it's good to practice gratitude and to be grateful for the people that serve the medicine and for the people who, and for the, for the container that it's being held in. But at the end of the day, you are your own teacher. These drugs unlock something within your brain. And that is something that it's what you bring to the table that matters. If you gave a 12-year-old LSD, they're just gonna see cool stuff. They're not gonna have, probably not gonna have these same profound realizations that we have as adults because they haven't gotten there yet. They haven't, they're not in a place to be able to teach themselves, but we are. These drugs allow us to unlock our inner teachers in many ways. But it's important not to give your power away to the drug and to realize that you are unlocking something that is naturally within you. It is your birthright to be able to explore this place and to know that part of you so that you may carry it with you into your waking life. And I think after that, so if you want to learn more about Thomas Ray, snap a picture of this really quick. I'll give you all a moment. His websites, don't expect too much as far as design for the first website, but I love this man so much and what he's done. He's a very interesting man. He's a polymath, very good at many things, worth looking into. And my hope is that people will take greater interest in his work and make it their own as I have. Our next steps are to bioassay more drugs so their states can be reverse engineered and understood, identify more receptors that can be brought into consciousness, isolate more subunits of receptors in order to better understand their specific effects, and to build out the toolkit. My personal interest is developing new novel states along with therapeutic protocols for various forms of psychological trauma. If I didn't mention it before, go grab a poster. They're $10. There's only 20 of them. I'm sure there's 8 or some small number left. Yeah. It kind of alchemizes us all into one frame. It's a lot to grasp, but having this poster is nice. I could also send you the PDF, but having it the poster is really nice. Plus, it's gas money for me. Questions?
Can you speak a little bit about your own personal growth with working with these medicines and how that's fueled your research and how the two interconnect?
Yeah, so good question. My experience with Wally is what had me quit my day job and focus on this. At the time, I was seeking to heal some deep birth trauma that I'd come to ayahuasca with. I'd sat 3 times with ayahuasca, and I got nothing out of it that I was aware of. No insights, no revelations, no breakthroughs, no psycho-spiritual experience to speak of. I was very disheartened, and I began playing with cocktails. I began playing with combinations. I came up with Wali, and I had the single most profound healing experience of my life up to that point, where I was able to relive my birth and kind of reparent myself through the process, like going through the birth canal, being held for the first time, just the whole experience, and having that experience alone was what had me see the profundity and the power of these medicines, and that I wanted this to be something that other people could experience. And then over the years, I've occasionally battled with depression, and it has been a surprisingly invaluable tool in being able to knock me out of it and get me out of my narratives, get me out of my stories, and have myself say, okay, now what? So yeah, it's been profound. It's been profound. So is there another one? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying about the drug not being it's just the instrument, the yeast that foments everything, and
Yeah.
I'm totally on board with that. But then it reminded me of something that Terence McKenna said about mushrooms, and that mushrooms themselves were like an entity that only manifested itself once it got eaten by humans and, you know, became alive in the body. And he was talking about mushrooms, in fact, being another life form or another consciousness, that the only way it got to manifest itself was through human consumption. And I wondered what you thought about what Terence McKenna said.
So that's a really good question. I'm glad someone asked this, because I don't know. There's something weird going on with consciousness of plants and fungus and toad venom and whatnot, that there's some additive property of consciousness that I don't know if we'll ever be able to reduce it away. I think there's something in it. There's something to it. So all of this applies to synthetic substances, and it may apply to some plants, but there's something going on that I don't know if it's reducible. I don't know if there might just be some additive property of consciousness that we don't fully understand.
Yeah, because he keeps talking about how the mushroom talked to him, and it definitely wasn't the fomenting inside of his own consciousness and wisdom. It was an external consciousness manifesting itself in humans, and they had a symbiotic relationship for thousands of years.
I don't know. I don't know if I fully agree with that statement. My sense is that it could be something that's so grand and so knowledgeable and so wise that he did not feel comfortable identifying with it, that it was more comfortable to say that was an entity that was giving me this ancient wisdom rather than claiming to be the source of that wisdom himself. This is something I experience a lot in my DMT experiences. It is quite possible that is all happening in our minds, and that we are tapping into something that's ancient and primordial within ourselves. Are we done? Okay, we're wrapping up.
I just over here. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to see what you thought about salvia, because it's something that I've had an experience with, and it was only kind of, for me at least, briefly on the scene, and most people I've interacted with had a very negative experience with it, but I actually had a very mind-opening one, and I was just curious to know if you had any thoughts on that chemically and just historically.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this very briefly, and then we can speak afterwards. So salvia is, I've spoken to a shaman about this. Salvia has a water spirit, and it does not really like to be smoked very much. They do have tinctures available, which are kind of difficult to do, but through a tincture form, it is a bit more palatable, or the experience is quite a bit more palatable. And it's a very, very interesting drug in that it's almost a pure kappa agonist. Talk to me afterwards, though. There's interesting things about salvia. We have to.
Salvinorin A is a very peculiar substance and quite unique in the fact that it's been observed with rodents especially that there's a different effect on male and female rodents. This has been reported quite extensively on humans as well. So women usually have a far more positive experience than men, that instead just consider the experience truly holy and thoroughly horrible and horrific. And Women instead have very mystical and transcendental experiences, so that should answer your question.
Thank you, Jack. Good man. All right, thank you all so much.